A military salute to the Grange Area war veterans of World War I and World War II. World War I. Charles Vile. World War I officer's tunic and Sam Brown belt worn by First Lieutenant Charles Vile, lifelong LaGrange resident. Charles Vile was the grandson of the early pioneer Samuel Vile, who came to the area in 1834. Charles Vile spent his childhood at 124 South 7th Avenue, and in later life resided at 316 South Spring Avenue and 240 South Sunset Avenue. Charles Vile is also pictured in the photograph hanging to the right, donated by Charles's daughter Laura Vile Ryan. Camp Grant. U.S. Army facility in Rockford, Illinois, named in honor of American Civil War General Ulysses S. Grant. All Army servicemen from the LaGrange area were sent to Camp Grant for training after enlisting. Camp Grant was in operation from 1917 to 1946, covering an area of 5,600 acres during World War I and 3,200 acres during World War II, donated by American Legion Post 41. World War I officer's tunic. The red and black patch on the left shoulder indicates a member of the Illinois Black Hawk Division, 86th Infantry Division. Anonymous donation. Clarence Fisher. World War I lieutenant's uniform and U.S. officer's campaign hat worn by Clarence Boy Fisher in the 32nd Field Artillery Regiment. Fisher was born in LaGrange and lived at 201 South Viola. He enlisted on June 30, 1917, and served as a private in the 355th Ambulance Company, 89th Division before transferring to the 32nd FA Regiment. He was promoted to First Lieutenant on September 30, 1918. Fisher was discharged on December 13, 1918, with the demobilization of the 32nd Regiment. Donated by Clarence's son, Duncan Fisher. Carl A. Carlson. World War I Army cap worn by Carl A. Carlson. Carlson served in the 33rd Infantry, which later became the Illinois National Guard. Carlson enlisted on September 3, 1893, in the U.S. Navy Air Corps as a landsman. He served in the North Sea Patrol as a mechanic on an NC-4 transatlantic flight. Carlson was honorably discharged on July 2, 1919, at the rank of Mechanic Petty Officer First Class. The gold medal on his hat is a World War I Victory Medal with brass clasps representing the campaigns in which Carlson served, donated by Mark K. Carlson. Henry D. Livesey. World War I uniform worn by Henry D. Livesey. Livesey enlisted on January 25, 1918, as a private in the Ordnance Department Ammunition and Supplies Division, and was discharged on March 7, 1919, as a sergeant in the 103rd Ordnance Department. The two chevron patches on the left arm indicate 1 year served overseas. The rolls at the foot of the uniform are puttees, strips of fabric used to bind the lower leg over the trousers to provide support and prevent water from collecting in the boots. Henry Livesey married Vida Llewellyn on November 27, 1920, and later moved to 324 South 6th Avenue. Donated by Henry and Vida's daughter, Priscilla Livesey Boardman. Vida Llewellyn. YMCA volunteer uniform from World War I worn by Vida Llewellyn in France from 1918 to 1919. Vida Llewellyn served in Europe as a YMCA representative in World War I. Llewellyn grew up in LaGrange at 324 South 6th Avenue and attended Lyons Township High School. In 1917, she was introduced to a young man from the East Coast who happened to be visiting the area. His name was Henry D. Livesey. When war was declared, Mr. Livesey joined the army and was stationed in Europe. We do not know if Vida and Henry saw each other while both were stationed in Europe, but we do know that they stayed in touch after the war had ended. They were married on November 27, 1920. After the wedding, they moved to Pennsylvania, but some years later they returned to LaGrange and moved into Vida's childhood home on South 6th Avenue. Donated by Henry and Vida's daughter, Priscilla Livesey Boardman. Edward Johnson. World War I Seaman First Class Navy Middy or White Duck Uniform. World War I Naval Uniform. Worn by Edward Johnson of Menard County, Illinois. Edward Johnson enlisted on July 12, 1918 at the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. He later transferred to Grant Park for War Exposition Guard duty and later to Philadelphia. Donated by Edward's daughter Jacqueline Welch of LaGrange Park. Camp Logan. Photograph taken February 1918 of the 130th Field Hospital Company at Camp Logan in Houston, Texas. John Alexander Folkman. World War I Army uniform worn by John Alexander Folkman. Folkman enlisted on August 8, 1918, and served as an officer second lieutenant with the Sanitary Corps. He served in Camp Greenleaf, Georgia, from August 1918 to October 1918, and then as a Civil and Sanitary Corps engineer with the Edgewood Arsenal from October 1918 until his discharge on June 11, 1919. The leather patés around the ankles were worn to prevent water from collecting in the boots. Donated by American Legion Post 41. Edna Graybill Gifford. This nurse's cape was issued to Edna Graybill Gifford before she set sail to Europe in 1917. Edna was assigned to Army Hospital 34 in Nantes, France, where she remained for the duration of the war. Upon her return to the States, she worked as a public health nurse at servicemen's hospitals in Chicago. Edna moved to 117 South Viola Avenue, LaGrange, following her marriage to Edgar Gifford, a LaGrange fire chief. She was an active member of Post 41 and wore her navy blue cape once a year when she marched in the Memorial Day Parade as a member of the American Legion. Donated by Edna Gifford. William Stancliffe Fuller. 1926 tunic issued to Major William Stanliffe Fuller for service between World War I and World War II. Fuller enlisted during World War I on May 14, 1917, as a captain with the 344th Infantry, 86th Division. William Fuller and his wife Mary E. Fuller lived at 116 North Spring Avenue in LaGrange. Donated by Brooks Fuller, Jr. World War II. Bert F. Johnson. Air Force Lieutenant's dress uniform. The medals on this uniform indicate the following: Air Medal for single act of heroism while participating on an aerial flight. Served in air campaign. American Theater of Operation. 8th Air Corps officer jacket modified to Eisenhower style. Both uniforms were worn by First Lieutenant Bert F. Johnson during World War II. Johnson served in the U.S. Army Air Corps as a lieutenant with the 8th Air Force in England from 1943 to 1944. Donated by Bert F. Johnson. Edward Callell. World War II Army uniform worn by Major Edward Callell. Edward met his wife, Mary Elizabeth Lowe Callell, during World War II in Americus, Georgia, where he served as a flight surgeon with the Army Air Corps. Callell also served in China, Burma, and India, with a unit flying gasoline over the Himalayas. After the war, Callell worked as a surgeon at the Cook County Hospital, St. Anthony's Hospital, Hinsdale Hospital, and LaGrange Community Memorial Hospital. He and his wife Mary lived at 525 South Kensington Avenue in LaGrange. Donated by Dr. Edward Callell. Smith. World War II U.S. Naval Reserve's winter uniform, worn by the father of Jason Smith of Hinsdale. Donated by Jason Smith. William T. Mabon. World War II naval midi worn by William T. Mabon aboard the USS Legardo submarine. At the time of World War II, William Mabon lived in LaGrange, a graduate of Lyons Township High School. After 2 years at the University of Illinois, Bill enlisted in the U.S. Navy, intending to get his military service in before returning to school. A year later, Pearl Harbor was attacked, and Bill served the last 5 years of his life on a submarine. On May 3, 1945, USS Legardo, the submarine on which he served, was sunk in the Gulf of Siam, now Thailand. Signalman First Class Petty Officer William T. Mabon was one of the boat's 86-member crew who lost their lives 3 months before the end of the war. In a tragic irony, the loss of the submarine and news of the end of the war were announced by the War Department on the same day. 60 years later, USS Legardo was found in the Gulf of Thailand. It was the first missing submarine from World War II to be discovered. Bill Mabon left behind his wife, Margaret Miles Mabon, his daughter Nancy, and his parents Gordon and Nancy Mabon, all LaGrange residents. Margaret Mabon and daughter Nancy are descendants of LaGrange founder F.D. Cossett. For more information on William T. Mabon and the crew of the USS Legardo, see The Lost Submarine by Nancy Kenny. On loan from Nancy Kenny. Clayton Wells. Coast Guard Chief Petty Officer Service Dress, gray. This uniform was only in use for a short time, thus very few were produced. Coast Guard First Class Motor Machinist Mate Winter Uniform, custom made. Coast Guard Jacket of Garrison Cap. Coast Guard Chief Petty Officer Motor Machinist Mate Winter Dress Uniform. The circular ruptured duck patch above the right breast pocket permitted honorably discharged military personnel to wear their uniform for a short period of time after leaving military service, in the case that they were unable to afford civilian clothes. All items worn by Clayton Harding Wells during World War II. Wells enlisted in the U.S. Coast Guard on September 16, 1942, in Oak Park, Illinois. Boot camp was spent at Manhattan Beach, Brooklyn, New York, after which Wells was sent to Little Creek Lifeboat Station in Virginia to go aboard Lightship Relief. He was next transferred to New York City to Brooklyn High School of Automotive Trades for 3 months. Next, he was sent to Amphibian School in New River, North Carolina, and by this time Wells was a second-class motor machinist mate. Then he was transferred to San Francisco aboard the Eridanus, and it was on this ship that he spent the next 19 months in some 7 trips supplying the South Pacific with needed materials to combat the Japanese. The 7 trips he made to the South Pacific took him to Hawaii, Midway, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, New Zealand, New Hebrides, New Caledonia, Marshall Islands, and more. On a trip back to San Francisco, he was a victim of an accident aboard the ship, which landed him in Oak Knoll Naval Hospital when the ship made San Francisco. After convalescent leave, he was assigned to the Coast Guard operating base in Detroit for 2.5 months, and finished his Coast Guard duty on the buoy tender Sundew on the Great Lakes. Clayton Wells had made Chief Motor Machinist Mate while on duty in the South Pacific, and was such when he was discharged. He was honorably discharged on November 28, 1945. Clayton's wife, Margaret Wells, also served in World War II as a cadet nurse. Her uniform will be seen in the next room. Donated by Clayton and Margaret Wells. G. H. Hendrick. World War II naval midi worn by G. H. Hendrick. As a child, Hendrick lived at 301 South Catherine. He later moved to 204 South Spring, where he lived until 1984. Donated by Carol Norling, with permission from G. H. Hendrick. Charles W. Medler. Navy overcoat. U.S. Navy life jacket. Naval Air Corps uniform. Naval Air Corps uniform. Aviator helmet. Naval dress whites. Charles W. Mettler served as a Navy pilot during World War II. Mettler grew up in LaGrange at 229 South Ashland Avenue. He attended Lyons Township Junior College from 1935 to 1936 and graduated from University of Illinois in 1941 with a BS in physical education. He enlisted in the United States Navy in June 1941 as an aviation cadet and received his wings and ensign commission the following year at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi, Texas. He married Margaret Minich in LaGrange in June 1942. Mettler was released from active duty in October 1945 and moved to 341 South Stone Avenue in LaGrange. He began working for United Airlines as a co-pilot until his retirement in 1978. Mettler was promoted to captain in July 1952. Donated by Margaret Minich Mettler. Zanat M. Godzoza. U.S. Navy blanket owned by Zanat M. Godzoza, who lived at 1502 Beach in LaGrange Park in the 1950s. Godzoza was a diver with the U.S. Navy sent to Pearl Harbor to retrieve bodies from sunken ships. Donated by Carol Norling. Grover Rose, Jr. World War II Army uniform worn by Captain Grover Rose, Jr. Rose grew up at 94 Dover in LaGrange and attended school in District 102. He sustained a shrapnel wound and was honorably discharged in 1945. Grover later moved back to LaGrange and resided at 935 South Stone Avenue. The arrow patch on the left shoulder signifies service in the 22 Army Corps. Donated by American Legion Post 41. Lawrence P. Warner. World War II uniform worn by Major Lawrence P. Warner as a member of the Ordnance Branch, Persian Gulf Command. The patch on the left shoulder indicates service in the Persian Gulf, and the bar on the left sleeve indicates 6 months served overseas. Donated by Lawrence P. Warner. Fred Baumgardner. World War II Eisenhower corporal jacket worn by Private Fred Baumgardner. The circular A patch on the right sleeve indicates a member of the 3rd Army, and the sword patch on the left shoulder represents service in the European Civil Affairs Division. The 3 stripes on the left sleeve indicates 18 months of service overseas. The medals on this jacket indicate the following: Army Good Conduct Medal, Europe African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, American Theater of Operations. Donated by Fred Baumgardner. William Walney. Eisenhower jacket worn by Corporal William Walney during World War II, where he served as a mortarman. Walney served with the 10th Mountain Division, an elite winter warfare division sent to Italy and trained for combat in the mountains. In post-war times, the members of the mountain divisions strongly contributed to the rise of skiing as a recreational sport. The 2 chevron patches on the left sleeve indicate the rank of corporal. The medals on this uniform represent the following: World War II Victory Medal, American Campaign Medal, European Theater of Operation. Donated by Diane Walney. Ernest Lawing. World War I petrol officer's hat with gold palm leaf worn by Major Ernest Lawing. Donated by Ernest's niece, Carol Norling. Robert Eckel. World War II Army winter uniform and overcoat worn by Robert Eckel of LaGrange Park. Eckel served as supply sergeant with the Quartermaster's 2nd Army Corps. Donated by Robert Eckel. LaGrange answers the call. This photo gallery features the Grange Area servicemen as they prepare to depart for service. Most are posed in front of the LaGrange Village Hall. To the right is a collection of articles and photographs from local newspapers highlighting the impact of World War II on the LaGrange home front. The planes hanging from the ceiling were used to train civilians to recognize the difference between U.S. and enemy planes in case of aerial attacks. John Champion. U.S. Army Air Force summer formal uniform worn by John Champion during World War II. Lieutenant Colonel Champion served as a pilot in the European, Mediterranean, and North African theaters of operation during World War II. He was appointed commander of the 9,624th Air Force Reserve Squadron in River Forest in 1958, and commander of the 9,000th Air Force Reserve Training Squadron, O'Hare Field, in 1968. As a child, Champion lived at 237 South 8th Avenue and was a lifetime LaGrange resident. He graduated from Lyons Township High School and Junior College in 1939. The medals on this uniform represent the following: Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal 25 missions, American Defense Medal, served before World War II, American Theater of Operation, Pacific Theater of Operation, European Theater of Operation, World War II Victory Medal, Reserves, donated by John Champion. Women in Service. Lorraine Ulmer, World War II Women's Army Corps dress uniform. The gold bar patches on the sleeves signify Technical Sergeant. The medals on this uniform represent the following: Army of Occupation, Post-World War II National Defense Medal, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with hourglass device signifying 10 years, Army Reserve Component Achievement Medal with oak leaf signifying additional years. Women's Army Corps summer uniform. Matching insignia on both sleeves signify Technical Sergeant. Donated by Lorraine Ulmer. Alberta I. Weirfell. Photographs, memorabilia, and WAC certificate owned by Alberta I. Weirfell. The photos and letters hanging on the wall to the left are keepsakes of Alberta's service in World War II. Weirfell served in the Women's Army Corps as a driver and later as supervisor of a motor pool on a military base in Washington. After her military discharge in 1945, she returned to the Chicago area and began working for American National Bank, where she became the first female senior vice president and controller. Later in life, she moved to LaGrange Park, where she resided until 2006, on loan from Sarah Carpenter. Margaret Wells. World War II cadet nurse in training uniform worn by Margaret Wells. Margaret's husband Clayton Wells also served in World War II as a chief petty officer for the U.S. Coast Guard. Several of his uniforms were seen earlier. Donated by Clayton and Margaret Wells. Mary Ellen McCracken. Class A Air Force nurse uniform. Worn by Mary Ellen McCracken from 1951 to 1964 to official functions while traveling on orders and when on duty other than in a hospital. The medal near the right pocket above her name tag is a Presidential Unit citation. This award signifies extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy presented by the President. The medals above the left pocket represent the following: American Campaign Medal, European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, Army of Occupation, National Defense, Air Force Longevity, 4 years, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with hourglass device signifying 10 years. Air Force issued raincoat. Class A Air Force uniform raincoat. Class A Air Force Nurse Corps uniform. Worn by McCracken from 1943 to 1946 to official functions while traveling or leaving base unless otherwise designated by orders. McCracken served in World War II in Patton's Army, just behind the front line rather than with a MASH unit. Donated by Mary Ellen McCracken. Service flag. Service flags are displayed by family members of those serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. The banner was designed in 1917 by U.S. Army Captain Robert L. Quiser of the 5th Ohio Infantry and were first used during World War I. Each star on the flag represents a family member or loved one serving in the armed forces. A blue star represents an individual who is currently serving. A gold star represents an individual who lost their life during military service. Donna Jean Roselle. Waves uniform worn by Donna Jean Roselle during World War II. Women accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, or WAVES, was a unit of the U.S. Naval Reserve that enlisted women for roles in aviation, medical professions, science, technology, and communications. Roselle was stationed in Dillon, Florida for over 6 months. Originally from Seattle, Washington, Roselle moved to LaGrange later in life and resided at 5707 South Peck. Donated by Donna Jean's daughter, Kelly Herndon. Irene Mandel Elliott. World War II Red Cross volunteer uniform and headpiece worn by Irene Mandel Elliott. Donated by Irene Mandel Elliott. Ruth Fitzsimmons. Red Cross volunteer uniform worn by Ruth Fitzsimmons. In addition to her service in the Red Cross, Simmons served as a pilot in the Ferrying Command. After graduating with the 5th class of women pilots at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas, Simmons was in charge of ferrying planes and supplies across the country. Donated by Ruth Fitzsimmons.